All right, well, welcome back, everyone. We're at our last session of the day, and just as a reminder, we really need your help, and that is to ask questions. So if you have a question, please enter it into the chat feature, and we're going to get our panelists to answer it. So for our final panel discussion of the day, we're going to have one on authentic conversations with emerging leaders. And we're lucky to have 3 leaders from across Canada. And this particular session is going to be moderated by Kelly Rowe. And I mentioned earlier, Kelly is from NOWS, and she's the Canada Government Sector Leader. And we're very pleased to have her here today as our sponsor and to moderate this session. So Kelly, over to you.
Great. Thanks, David. And welcome, everyone. Welcome to the audience members across the country. We're excited to be here today having authentic conversations with emerging leaders. As David mentioned, I'm Kelly Rowe. I'm NOWS Group, Canada's government consulting lead. So NOWS Group, we are a sponsor of this conference, a proud sponsor. We're an international management consulting company that was started in Australia over 20 years ago, and we've since opened up offices in the UK and Canada, where we mainly work with the public sector. I myself have previously worked as a public servant in the Ontario government. As I mentioned, we're proud to sponsor the event, and we really hope you find it valuable as you reflect on your career strategy in the public service. I do want to start out by introducing our panel members today. We have 3 very impressive panel members. Just to start with Amzie Marikal, who is Mohawk and Plains Cree from Tyendinaga Mohawk Territory in Ontario, and Muskeg Lake Cree Nation in Treaty 6 Territory, Saskatchewan. Amzie recently completed a Master's of Public Policy and Administration at Carleton, and now keeps herself busy as a research associate for Carleton Centre for Community Innovation. So welcome, Amzie. Cassandra White is a Director of Strategy within ISED, so that's Innovation in Science and Economic Development Canada and the federal government in the Life Sciences and Biomanufacturing branch. Welcome, Cassandra. And then we've got Victor Castellino, who is a manager within the Ontario Ministry of Health Supply Chain Modernization branch. So welcome and welcome to the 3 of you. Before we jump into it, I just wanted to say that the topic we'll be covering is quite broad. So we want to have real conversations today. Authentic is the key takeaway here. Real conversations about career lessons and how to navigate into leadership positions. So we'll cover some of those common challenges and how to navigate those. And I'll be asking the panelists a series of questions, but we'd also like to receive questions from you. So as David mentioned, please drop those into the chat throughout the session. I'll leave the last 20 minutes of the session to draw on those questions and pose those to the panelists. So do have them coming in as we go through the discussion. To kick us off, I'd like to really just start by having our panelists give us a brief sense of their career journeys to date. So I might want to start with you, Cassandra. Tell us a little bit about your career journey in the public service.
Sure, thank you. So maybe I'll start with where I am now and work backwards a little bit. And so as Kelly mentioned, I'm currently the Director of Strategy within the Life Sciences and Biomanufacturing branch at Innovation Science and Economic Development. And so I've been a director now officially for about 1.5 years, and then I was in a few acting roles before that. I would say at least my experience set kind of very rapidly expanded in the context of the pandemic. And so I was involved in the department, a lot of the department's efforts to stand up new capacity in the country to produce vaccines, therapeutics. And so it was very, very busy, great opportunity to get all kinds of exposure. We formed a whole new branch in the department. And so really exciting to not only be involved with a very high priority file, but also have that experience of forming kind of a whole new organization. So it's been a really, really interesting couple of years. Before that, I was at ISED for a number of years in a few different roles. I actually started in the strategic policy sector at ISED and did lots of different work in that capacity, focused on the innovation and skills plan at that time, as well as some results-based work and performance measurement. And prior to that, I actually started my career with the federal government at Natural Resources Canada, and that was a little bit more aligned with my academic background. I studied resource management, policy and economics, as well as international development. And so I did some time in energy policy as well as with Canada's Forest Service. So a range of experiences. And then before that, I was in academia and completing degrees, and so that's kind of it.
Great. Yeah, what a great journey. Victor, how about you?
Hi. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm Victor Castellino. I'm a health strategist and policy wonk, is what I would call myself now. I'm currently a manager with the Ontario Ministry of Health Supply Chain Modernization Branch, and as the name would suggest, I work on modernizing our public sector supply chain. So like Cassandra, I've spent a lot of the last couple of years working on our pandemic response. And in my case, this was getting supplies for our sector in the middle of really the most massive global supply chain disruption we've ever seen. And that's certainly an interesting public sector task. But I've also had the opportunity to work on a wide range of health transformation projects, digital health, integrated care, innovation, probably one of my favorites. And I think important for the audience here is I didn't start as a policy wonk. I'm actually an engineer with a PhD by training, working in labs and research, and I transitioned into government, both out of a really specific love for healthcare policy and specifically health innovation. And that's really kind of guided my journey to where I am today. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm also a recovering PhD. Anthony, how about you?
Thank you, Kelly, for that introduction. I guess my career started quite some time ago. I'm in a new career now, new area, but it started when I was a teenager, working in the Friendship Center movement as a summer student. And I've worked in program administration for the most part for my entire career. I did my undergrad in business administration. And so I, started working in Indigenous organizations program administration at the AFN for a brief while, and then I transitioned over to the NIB Trust Fund, which was responsible for administering the residual funds from the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement for cultural programming, education programming, and directly to students and individuals who are hoping to learn their culture. So that's how it started. After that, I realized, that work wasn't achieving the goals that I wanted to achieve or doing the work that I wanted to do. So I decided to go back for my master's after about a 10-year break from my undergrad. And I did my master's in public policy and administration, focusing in Indigenous policy and administration through Carleton University. And there is where I got involved in a research project called the Rebuilding First Nations Governance Project, which was exactly what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be going. So it really worked out well that way. So now I continue to work on the Rebuilding First Nations Governance Project, as Kelly mentioned, as a research associate with Carleton University. I wear a couple other hats as well. I work for the Center for First Nations Governance. I'm a facilitator in training for inherent rights governance workshops in First Nations communities across the country. And I also work at my community's band office with my chief a few days a week to balance it out and learn a little bit about Indian Act administration as well. So that's me.
Very cool. Thank you, Anthony. Such impactful work. That's really cool. I wanted to just kick off the kind of broader conversation with kind of the topic around authenticity. So several years ago, kind of this authentic leadership concept was all the rage. And then we've seen it actually show up in, leadership models in the public service. So the Ontario Public Service, for example, has I am authentic as kind of one of its pillars. And so I wanted to just explore this a little bit, and maybe I'll just start by having a little bit of a quote or a paraphrase here that I read from an HBR article. So authentic leadership, at its most basic level, authenticity means being genuine, not a replica, not a copy or an imitation. In leadership, being genuine implies that we are embodying our true selves into our leadership role. This is an interesting caveat, though. Authentic leadership means making the most of our strengths, recognizing and trading off our weaknesses, and taking full accountability for the impact we have on others, which really infers a bit of kind of emotional intelligence that is required or kind of underpinning that. And so I wanted to just pose the question to the panelists. What does authentic leadership really look like in the public sector? And where have you seen it be really effective or in fact not effective at all? And maybe I'll just start with Cassandra on that one.
Sure, and that was actually a great quote, and I think sets up well, for what I'd like to speak about with respect to authentic leadership. And so I think, in my view, I think authentic leadership really has a lot to do with what drives you as an individual, both in terms of your professional responsibilities, as well as your interactions with your colleagues, including, your superiors, staff on your team, peers. I think an authentic leader is really motivated by a genuine commitment to growing their expertise, and then doing that in a way that recognizes what you don't know, as well as how your lenses will be different from others within your organization, outside of your organization. And then, alongside a respect for the experiences that others bring to the table. And then maybe most importantly, an openness and a willingness to really readily admit that. And so, I think when taking on a new challenge, I think the most successful leaders that I see, as well as traits demonstrated by members of my own team, are those who really fully immerse themselves in what it is that they're doing. And so trying not to think of work or an assignment necessarily as a means to an end. For instance, working on a high profile initiative to gain recognition or move up quickly. To me, I think this is a really big part of authenticity. I think for those who do that, opportunities will naturally present themselves and open up to those individuals. And I think the care that people are bringing to their work is very transparent. And I think that message crosses over to the ways that we're interacting with one another too. So caring about the success of the team, the initiatives, and then one another's well-being too. So.
Right. So it's definitely the caring side, so that, caring about your staff, but also it sounds like caring about the mission, right? So being there also to get the job done because you actually believe in it. And then that will kind of help you embody kind of the spirit of authenticity. Interesting. Amzi, how about you?
Yes, authentic leadership in the public sector, to me, I haven't really worked in the public sector per se, but to me, authentic leadership really is about accountability. And I know, in the public sector, accountability often goes into a hierarchical structure that goes upwards to your supervisors and your ministers, etc. But really, what it means to me is being accountable to the people you serve. And I think that, especially in the public sector, in governance related work, it's important to be mindful of who you are accountable and how you can be accountable to the people that you're serving and not just the people who you report to, etc. Another thing is, I'm looking for, authentic leaders that are principled. I'm big on principles. It's important for me to align my work with my values. And a part of that is, it's almost like a sense of loyalty. It's like you want to know that a leader has your back and is there for you and is helping you grow. Another thing that I thought of when I was thinking about this question was, just having a leader that's human. I've worked for bosses that didn't even care to ask about my day or my life or anything like that. And it's important to create those relationships and have those sort of authentic, human interactions with people that you work with. And so that's something that I really look for in somebody that I consider a leader. Someone that will help you think about, how to bring you opportunities that will help advance your career. I've had, leaders that have said to me, like, this will look really great on your CV, you should do this. And, thinking about those kinds of things for you is really helpful. And leaders, I've also found leaders who make personal investments in the organization, who, contribute to the organization in their own way when they can. And I also wanted to talk about, the standards that we hold our leadership to. I think that's changed over time. And I know especially in my culture, we had very specific standards for our leaders, and it wasn't, the typical has to be over the age of 18 or whatever, it has to have this certain degree kind of thing. So thinking about the standards that you hold your leaders to and really sticking by that as well.
Very interesting. On the authentic interactions, and I wonder, because it's been in my mind that we've got so many kind of video calls meetings these days, right? Because most of us are still at home most of the time. And we've kind of lost that, that coffee chat and catch ups, and we kind of start and end meetings all around business. Do you think we've lost some of that authenticness, our authenticity and human connection, because we're so kind of video call oriented now and not a little less in the office space?
It's definitely harder, I think, doing it virtually, but I think there are ways. And I think that it's important to create those spaces, like you said, to have those conversations, those water tank conversations, water cooler conversations is what I was thinking of. And just, creating those relationships. It's harder, but it's possible. And, there's often times where we find different ways to communicate. And it's not always through Zoom. Sometimes it's a phone call, switching it up helps. And then, finding time to meet in person as well.
Yeah, true. Victor, how about you? Have you seen authentic leadership work well in the OPS?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll build on what Cassandra and Emzy have said as well. I really like the commentary and accountability. That's a big theme for me in the kind of work that we do. So to me, authenticity comes with a few characteristics that I've seen in others and try to practice myself. I don't think it just means earnestness and honesty, although those are both important. And I'm a bit of a hard on the sleeve public servant myself, and find that it's important to draw that line and remember kind of how to mix that with professionalism. So people I consider authentic, they say what they'll do and they do what they say. They're credible, they're reliable, they set understandable and I think fair boundaries. And sometimes that means acknowledging your limitations, as Cassandra mentioned. They treat people as people with their own lives, even though the reality is, as a leader, and especially as you move into more senior positions, you have to sometimes make very difficult decisions that impact other people's lives, and always keeping that in mind. And so there's a self-awareness and an emotional intelligence about that, like valuing yourself and the people around you. And I've seen that a lot in major healthcare transformation projects where there are many moving parts. It takes effective and authentic leadership to overcome what I'll call a public sector inertia, and get a wide range of stakeholders on board. And that's so important in the kind of work that we all do. I found that authentic leaders, they really help to inspire their teams to be problem solvers and not just problem identifiers. And that takes trust. You have to feel that, as an employee, as part of a team, you have to feel that your ideas are going to be valued, and you're not just a resource on a map somewhere. And I think it's also important to draw the contrast that what does inauthentic leadership look like? In my view, it looks performative. It looks like someone, going through the motions of a checklist that they've been handed. And I'm sure we've all seen what that looks like in our careers. And to be honest, sometimes inauthentic leadership gets the job done just short term. And it's also the premise of many TV shows. It can be a funny topic, but it doesn't build the bridges. It doesn't build the relationships. It doesn't build the long-term trust that you need to succeed. And I think that's what really is like, it's the difference between a career where people look to you as a trusted professional versus all the other options that can come with being an inauthentic leader.
Yeah, those are great points. I like that, looking at it on the other side. So just as we reflect more on those characteristics, as I mentioned, there are leadership models that obviously exist in the public sector. What do you think are those important behaviors that emerging leaders need to demonstrate to move into more senior roles in the public service or in any other kind of broader public service entity? And I might start with you again, Cassandra.
Sure. So I think that we really have moved into quite what I see as a new era. I think that there are higher expectations from employees in terms of what they're getting out of their job, what the boundaries look like, what that work life looks like as well as from the organization. And I think, again, a lot of this relates back to how it is that we engage with one another. Maybe just to kind of refer back to the pandemic experience that we've all lived, it's definitely top of mind for me. I think what it really highlighted is that, every single person was dealing with their own unique set of challenges and during the pandemic. And I think, it really was very, very obvious to me as a manager of people that, that those were no less for any one individual than another, just, potentially different. And I think, so it was really quite important to understand that, to be able to, continue to work with the team in a high in a high pressure in potentially, hopefully, high impact environment. And so all of that to say, I think empathy is one of the most important things. Empathy to staff, first and foremost, as a manager of people, again, ensuring that people feel valued, feel heard, feel respected. And part of that has to do with, how you understand and play to people's strengths too, I think. And so, I think that quality of empathy, it extends to helping people manage through personal and professional situations, both for their own sake, as well as to ensure happy, productive workplace. Also helping to understand the motivations of others. And so it's a really important tool for collaboration, which I think is another piece that I'd really highlight as one of those important qualities. It comes up over and over again. The way that we're able to convene, collaborate, build consensus is absolutely essential. And I think that extends to all kinds of situations. We're working with internal colleagues, with other departments, with external stakeholders. And another big part of that is just respecting the opinions of others. And again, I think reaching consensus through dialogue. And then I think some of the traits that are probably quite traditional and maybe sound a little bit boring, but they continue to have a lot of value. And so I think dedication, commitment, those things will always be really important. And they always show through taking ownership over your work, seeing it through, being able to make choices, and then clearly articulating why you did something the way that you did, and owning that piece of your work. And again, it relates back to that kind of message of caring about what you're doing as well. And then also consistency, reliability. If your managers know that they're able to depend on you without fail, I think that has a really significant impact as, those are the kinds of people that managers want to get involved in, sort of, the high profile, fast moving, high impact work as well. And so I think those to me are some of the really core pieces.
Yeah, I mean, Victor, you mentioned that too, reliability. I mean, we find, and certainly in consulting, the consultants that are really, really reliable get a lot of the work, right? So we just keep giving them the work, and maybe it's the same in the public service as well. So it feels like a bit of a curse if you're on the receiving end on that, but that's actually a really positive sign, right, for your growth. Victor, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the Ontario Public Service model. And we have those statements like, I am authentic, I'm accountable, I am courageous, inclusivity, growth, future-oriented mindset. They're all things that kind of feature in our HR models. So we've covered authenticity. Other favorites of mine are things like resilience and agility. Agility is not often what you think of when you think of public service, but here we are, and I think we can all attest to how important that is when you're on the inside. But I'm going to double down on the accountability piece, because that to me is I think one of the biggest messages that I'd hope that the audience really takes away. Because for many of you, you might be at a point in your career where you're building that credibility as a professional. You're trying to deliver high quality work. You're trying to work collaboratively. You're also learning what you're good at, what you like to do or don't. And in my experience, accountability is one of those critical traits throughout your career that just grows more important as you progress. And early in your career, accountability means being reliable. It means being true to your commitments. It means being someone that your peers and your managers can trust to do your part. But as you progress into more senior roles, that accountability means owning work. It means being that problem solver that finds a way over obstacles, who really walks the talk when it comes to your values and your ethics, your expectations of others, expectations of yourself, actually. And that gets noticed. And especially as you're thinking about how your career progresses, you want to be the person that your past and your future mentors remember. You want them to speak well of you to others, as the person who delivers, as the person who gets it done, who can do it with minimal instructions, who can find their way around this, who owns the work that they've been given and takes it seriously and sees themselves not just as an extension of their manager, but like as a person with ideas and with goals, and as someone proud of their outcomes. So that's why accountability gets my vote.
And it's kind of, I think what you're also speaking to is self-management in a way. You really have to learn to self-manage yourself to get the work done when it's due and to be reliable. And so if you're seen to be that person where I can just throw you that file and I know that so-and-so is going to get that done in a week, no problem, and it's going to be top quality. I mean, that's again really great for kind of your growth trajectory if word gets around that you're that type of person, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to just change gears a little bit. So I know AMSI, the organizations that you work within are probably a little less familiar to some of the people joining us today. And I wanted to get a sense from you what you've kind of learned about charting your kind of career path in those organizations. Any kind of advice for the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. So I knew going into my master's that working in the government was never really my goal, and that wasn't what I wanted to do. But nevertheless, I took a master's in public policy and administration, but I learned a lot from the program, and it taught me a lot about what I wanted and what I didn't want to do. And I think it's important to take the time to think about the kind of work you want to do and finding work that fits your goals. Aligning myself with people with similar goals was really important for me. Networking was a huge part of building my career and entering the workforce. There's a lot of people who graduated from my program that didn't go into the public service, that work for nonprofit organizations and are still doing really meaningful work in governance related areas. And I guess for me, going into my program and knowing that I didn't want to work in the system or work in the government, but wanting to change the system is just, keeping in mind that there are other ways to do it. That it's important to think outside the box and know that there's not just one career path for you. So, if the government really isn't for you, that's fine, because there's so much other work outside of the system. And for me, going into it, knowing that I wanted to change the system, but not within the system, was really important for me. And I had to find ways to be able to do that. And, I'm doing it through things like research and, gaining experience in the work that I know I don't want to be in. It's also a part of it, right? Working in band administration, working under Indian Act legislation, it's not easy, but it's important to learn those systems as well so that you can, be the change that you want to see. And I think that's an important part of knowing that, there are non-contemporary ways to going into governance-related work.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, I think the knowing what not to do is really important, and it takes time to figure that out, right? It's kind of like you have to make a few mistakes to really know what you don't want to do, right? Just a note to the audience, please do drop your questions in the chat and we'll get to those in about 10 minutes or so. Wanted to keep moving with the advice. So what do we think are some of the common barriers or challenges for new professionals that they'll have to overcome as they advance in their careers in the public sector, and what might your advice be to them for overcoming those? I'll start with Victor.
Sure. So I think I'm going to try and pick something fairly high level here, because there are a lot of administrative headaches early on, like competing for jobs. And I don't want to minimize that when job security is probably top of mind for a lot of people when it comes to barriers and challenges. But beyond that, I think the top challenge in my mind is figuring out where you fit and what kind of spots you should be pursuing, because that can be not so obvious, especially if you're entering the workforce for the first time, and you're not sure how your skills apply. And I really appreciate MZ's comments on you get the master's and like the range of trajectories that you can pick from there. Some of the advice I like to give people interested in healthcare specifically is that health in Canada has so many layers of strategy and policy and delivery, from the government to frontline clinical care. And it's really important to figure out what you find rewarding enough to pursue, what you can tolerate, and what's just not your cup of tea. So for me, I realized early on that I love turning 1,000 gears to shape an outcome years down the road. And that's strategic policy, and it's why I am where I am. For others, it's much more rewarding to see the impact of your work on someone's face or down the hall. And the sooner you find those sweet spots and realize like, what it is that keeps you coming back, the easier it is to start thinking ahead in your career. And that's one of the things I wish I'd figured out 10 years ago. But it's something you'll be able to look back on and see how you overcame those challenges along the way.
For sure, yeah. It is a little bit like peeling an onion, right? The layers that you might understand that health is X, but there's actually, as to your point, there's so many different parts and aspects to health alone, or science and innovation in Cassandra's case that you really have to kind of get into to really understand deeply. Cassandra, what about you? What do you think some of the challenges are that kind of new professionals will have to overcome?
Yeah, and I actually thought quite a bit about this question because I agree there are a lot of things to highlight, and I think that just a couple of things, and maybe I'll be a little bit just kind of practical and targeted in the things that I point to because there are quite a few things. But to me, I think one of the very most important things that any new professional should probably focus on as sort of like maybe priority, I don't know if it's number one, but pretty high up there, is effective communication, making sure that you're understood. And I find that there's a real mix in terms of how people approach this, but being clear, direct, concise, staying on topic, kind of not meandering in the way that you present things orally. And of course, as public servants, we do a lot of written briefings. That's a skill set unto itself, is to kind of organize your thoughts logically. But I think, at least as important, perhaps more, is even just how you're communicating with, and I'm not talking about just communicating with, your direct supervisor, but with your peers, with your colleagues. And part of that is also, communicating in a respectful way. So you're not dominating the table necessarily, you're giving space for others to talk, you're actively listening. That's part of, I think, part of effective communication too. So I think that's a super important thing, and a thing that everybody should focus on. And I think the other thing that I'd highlight is, and it kind of relates to the forming your network, but I think kind of one of the most important pieces of that is finding and connecting with your mentors, your supporters, the people that really resonate with you, somebody who you admire the way that they do their job. And, it doesn't even need to be someone doing exactly the same thing as you, but again, and it speaks to some of the comments from Anzi and Victor, having aligned values, somebody who you can look up to, who delivers in a way that you respect, I think is really important. And those people who, recognize the value in your contributions and your potential as well, and who will help you on your learning journey, who will continue to support you, who will continue to vouch for you and continue to offer you that guidance in your path. And I think, if you're kind of open to that and you're kind of looking for it, those people will show up at all stages of your life and really value those relationships.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Yeah. Anzi, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with what Victor and Cassandra had said, and I guess to not repeat what they said, but I think one of the biggest barriers for myself was me entering into the workforce. I was telling our panelists before we joined the group, imposter syndrome is very real, and I felt it, throughout my master's, felt it as I finished my master's, and just overcoming those fears is really important. And knowing your place and that you belong, and finding your place is really important, and finding where you belong. I also think after both my undergrad and my master's, I kind of felt like my program set me up to feel like I could take on the world. And then you finish your program and you're by yourself. You're back to being 1 in 8 billion people in the world, and you have to find your place. You have to find what mark you want to make. So I think that's really important. Also, I felt entering and being a new professional, entering into a new career, there's definitely been times where I felt like I could be doing more, or I'm capable of doing more. But it really is important to put in your time and find ways to learn and grow and build within the organization. Putting in your time is something that I had to learn, the hard way. But it's important to do that and find ways to have your voice heard and valued. And it happens. Patience is a really big thing with that as well. Another thing, in terms of barriers, I think, more generically, the system is huge, and finding ways to make a difference is really tough, and it can feel really, really hard to do that when you're just one person and a very big system. But it happens. Everything contributes to that change, and so it's important to continue to do the work that you're doing. And a part of that is, as a barrier is, sometimes it's organizational cultures. Finding an organizational culture that works for you, and like you said, that aligns with your values as well. So.
Yeah. The imposter syndrome. I don't know if I've met anyone who hasn't faced this. It really is so common, right? Especially if you're changing careers, or so for some of the new professionals who are kind of new to the public service, they might feel that they're an outsider. Just curious though, like Victor and Cassandra, have you felt that at all throughout your careers, that you're kind of not meant to be there, or maybe an imposter, and someone's going to find out about you? Have you felt like that?
I'm feeling it right now. Never goes away.
Yeah, definitely. It's a common thing. And I think one of the things that when I entered public service, actually I also didn't really have an intention to come into the public service. And I think the thing I was most blown away by was the expertise, honestly. Like, so many people that are dedicated, that have worked in their fields for a long time. And so, it's easy to kind of feel that feeling like, wow, what am I stepping into? So.
Yeah.
If I could add there, I think it's also important, and this kind of a moment of epiphany that I hope we all have at some point, is you feel like the imposter, but you do have to recognize and be willing to value yourself. And sometimes that can take some time. And, you walk in and you think, how do I add value amongst all these experts? And there's an answer there. And learning to figure that out, and learning to believe it, and realizing that you can bring something to the table is just as an important, career step as all the other learning that you do.
That's a great point. Yeah. I just want to go to one of the questions we have here. And please do keep the questions coming. The question is, do you have any advice to navigate through having a manager who is inauthentic, so that it does not affect your trajectory or your reputation? And I feel like, Victor, that might need to go to you, because since you brought up the concept of inauthentic, have any advice?
Okay, I'll take that one. That's fair. And that's a really difficult scenario to be in. If you haven't had that experience already, I do think you should expect that at some point in your career. Not every relationship will be a perfect match. And I don't think it's just public sector. I think that's true of any workforce. So, a couple of things that I'd suggest focusing on that have helped me in those scenarios, where you have a leader that maybe doesn't jive with you. The first is to understand how to pick opportunities. And then I'm not saying pick battles, because that feels more confrontational than is implied here. But understanding when you need to be assertive and when you need to go with the flow. And this is especially true when you lead a team. You have mutual obligations to your staff or your teammates, and other people that are impacted by working with a challenging colleague or leader or senior management or something like that. The second is learning how and when to move on, and that can be really hard. It can be hard not to take mistakes and critiques, conflicts, other negative moments personally. The longer my career goes, I think the more obvious it's become to me how transient those situations are, how not forever they are, even though it feels like forever in the moment. And sometimes you have to accept that a certain role or relationship or dynamic just isn't the right path for you, and isn't right for you at all. And that can mean making some tough decisions about your career path and how you fit in it. And I think the main takeaway is that I don't think there's a perfect answer. I think you learn tools and strategies to like cope is the wrong word, but to manage the situation in a way that gets you through, and that also opens opportunities around that for you elsewhere. But I think the most important part is learning to make some of the decisions that you need to make around how that role and then that dynamic is affecting you personally.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice. It sounds also that you're saying really be thoughtful about your approach. And so try to refrain from being reactive, which sometimes the instinct is to react, and that might not get you the best outcome. So that makes a lot of sense. Just on a similar question, actually, navigating challenging personalities, not just leaders, but colleagues, will happen throughout, all of our careers. It's just, it's natural that you're not going to jive with everyone, as Victor said. So what have you learned from those interactions? So clearly, Victor, you've got some learnings from those, but did you ever have kind of an eruption with a colleague and then thought after some period that, geez, I took away this piece of, this thing that I kind of learned about myself or the way I handle these situations that was really helpful. Cassandra, maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's no, it's a great question, and I think similar to maybe the inauthentic managers, the inauthentic people that you might interact with, I think the longer your career goes on, this is just an inevitability, and especially I think it's one thing when you're kind of an individual in the system, you're responsible for your own files. As you start to become more, maybe knit into the fabric of a team or managing a team, I think these things come up with more regularity. I think, you learn a lot and you learn quickly. And there really is a silver lining to those situations, I think, in terms of how you interact with others and how you deal with those situations. I think a lot of it goes back to that effective kind of dialogue, communication, understanding the other perspective. I feel like in those situations, often just active listening is a very good approach. And, I think that those situations don't necessarily need to always come to a head. And I think it's kind of just a part of working with people, is that you will encounter those situations. Everybody will have their different perspectives and points of view, but there's a growth opportunity there. And I think so
yeah, learn from it, right? Yeah, that's a good point. Amzi, anything from you on that?
Yeah, I've definitely worked in a couple toxic organizations in my past. And I think, at the organization level, there were things that we did to help with that. There's training opportunities available. There's, workshops or training you can take on, how to communicate effectively, which I found really helped, like the way you word your sentences, the way you communicate your thoughts, and it's also not just, putting the blame on somebody else, but also taking a step back and seeing how you're contributing to that situation, and, assessing yourself and making sure, or thinking about how you handled situations and thinking about how you could have handled those situations. It's really important to evaluate yourself as much as you do other people. There's also, personalities trainings where you can learn how to deal with other personalities. Those opportunities are always available to help at the organization level. But, like Victor said, sometimes it's time to move on. And knowing when it's time to move on is a good practice. And, for me, I've worked in situations like that, and, getting my master's and, switching fields and learning more about different areas of work has really helped me to say, I don't work for people like you. If that's something that, is where the situation has come, is, putting yourself in that position to be able to say, like, this doesn't work for me and I don't work for people like you. And, getting yourself ready to do that career change if you need to. So that's also another part of it as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, so feel empowered to kind of opt out, if it's too much and you need to get away from it. Yeah, not an ideal scenario. Anything more to add, Victor, on that and the challenging conversations or challenging personalities?
Sure. I'll I think I've covered a lot of it in the previous answer, but one more thing I would add to that is to be self-aware about your own personality and yourself as well. Sometimes you're the challenging personality, and that can be really hard to accept and to learn about. And I think back over different phases of my career, staff that I've brought on, colleagues that I've worked with. Early on, you kind of have to meet people where they are in a lot of cases. And I can think of many scenarios, including surely me when I was a new grad, thinking about the need to be smart and an expert and leader and stuff like that. And it takes some time to realize that being smart and knowledgeable and all those things is not the same thing as being useful. That's learning to be useful and is kind of a skill set unto itself, and having that self-awareness about your role in conflicts and how you're perceived, and being able to put yourself in other shoes and having that empathy is actually really important. And there's a lot of tools to do that. We in the public sector role often have like the 360, the idea that you go for a kind of assessment that helps you better see how you see yourself and how others perceive you. It takes two to have that interaction, basically. And that's not to say that it's always shared. Sometimes you will generally work with people who are not comfortable to work with. And as Samsi pointed out, you have to be able to say, I don't work for someone like you. In a lot of other cases, the conflict is more subtle. And you have to learn to recognize that subtlety for what it is, and not necessarily feel that everything is a wall and the kind of an us versus them kind of world.
Yeah, great advice. We've got a question here, so we're gonna have to problem solve on the spot. Yasmin has a question which says, how do you respond to a manager who is giving you mundane tasks such as naming documents, creating birthday cards? In other words, how do you respond when you feel underutilized as a public servant? That's a tough situation. AMC, any advice for Yasmin?
Well, I'm not a public servant, but there's definitely times where I felt underutilized, or like I said, like you finish your master's, you finish your program, and you're ready to take on the world, and you realize how insignificant in the world you really are. But if you're feeling underutilized, I think, finding ways to be able to contribute other than the work that you're doing. I think, we've mentioned previously in our panel today that you have to go the extra mile. You have to take on tasks that you normally wouldn't take on. And, finding ways to be able to do that is a way to get around from that, I think. And I think, a part of that also may be, relationship building. Maybe they don't know what you're capable of doing. Maybe they don't know what kind of work history you have. So, being able to communicate what experience you do have or where you want to gain experience, could be helpful. I know if somebody came to me and said, I'd really like to go into this area, it wouldn't be right to say no and turn them away. So, hopefully that's an opportunity as well, as, to communicate, where you want to learn and have and work in a place that, that honors that.
Yeah, it's definitely, and it's tricky, right? If you want to have that conversation, it's, it is really framing it around how you want to grow and your skill set and that sort of thing. Cassandra, Victor, anything to add on that? Any advice for Yasmin?
I think I just add, I guess it's also a matter of assessing, doing your own assessment of what might be the reasons for that. Is it the actual work of the team that you're doing? Maybe, sometimes, unfortunately, some teams are just a lot busier than others, and some people want a much busier and fast-paced environment than others, and some self-awareness of that in terms of your preference is important, and understanding, if the place where you're at is good fit. And then I think, doing the things that you're asked to do really well and allowing that it does take time to establish relationships with your managers. I think this is something I've mentioned to my team quite a bit, in forming a new team. Actually, at one point, we had merged with another team. So I kind of had like 10 new people join my team all on the same day. It was quite intense. And that was sort of the first thing I said, is that please, like, I apologize and let's work together, because it's going to take a little bit of time for me to get to know what you're capable of, what you like doing, what your strengths are. And then similarly, for them to get to understand my style too. So some of it is just waiting it out, and then, doing the best job you can at the things that you're given, but communicating that too. If this is like a longer term situation, then I think that's a perfectly fair thing to be completely frank about that, and about stretch assignments and other things that you might like to take on.
Great, Victor.
Absolutely. I think those are all great comments, and like, echoing the root cause kind of thing, trying to assess it. I'll give some very practical advice to build on that, which is ask. Hopefully you have a one-on-one or an opportunity to book that time with your manager. And, with all of the context that MC and Cassandra went through, if you feel you're underutilized, or if someone does feel they're underutilized, it's worthwhile getting that assessment and, doing the analysis yourself, but also just saying, I'm feeling underutilized, and I think these are the skills that I could bring to the table. Sometimes the answer won't be favorable, right? Because you're trying to guess a little bit, and it's important, as we had discussed before, about to understand how others perceive you as well, both in terms of how they've perceived your work, but also what they're missing in terms of what they don't know about you. And hopefully, like in a somewhat healthy management relationship, there's ways to have that conversation, to ask that for that time, and at least to learn about what your opportunities are, and to build a plan. Like, maybe the answer is as simple as you don't have that relationship with your manager yet, or especially coming in fresh out of school and not having a lot of experience behind you. What are the things that you need to do to build trust and build credibility? Turn that into a plan, so you're not guessing and what your expectations are, and what your expectations are of your manager, and vice versa.
Yeah. I hope that was helpful, Yasmin. I know certainly with where it feels like the younger generations kind of coming in to the workforce right now are really ambitious and get bored easily. I feel like this is something that we see quite a bit, which is a wonderful thing. But we do have to keep people stimulated, and so that's also incumbent on the leaders to make sure that we're doing that. Another question, so maybe just getting down to the real practical advice. How can some of the new professionals really advance their career? So what are the specific things they can do? So mentors were mentioned, for example. Training was mentioned. There's stretch assignments that can be pursued. There's as we mentioned, some of these very open conversations around, hey, I want more, I want to stretch. What are those real specific things that we can kind of arm the new professionals with to go out and advance their careers? I'll start with Amzi.
Yeah, I think you really hit it there, Kelly, with all of your examples. That's exactly what I was going to say. There's ways to advance your career. There's tons of training out there. There's been times where I've looked up training that I'm interested in learning, and I've brought it to my employers and said, I'm really interested in doing this. I think it can help the organization this way. But there's also times where my employers have come to me and said, this training would be really great for you. And so finding those trainings that work for you. Another thing is, building your network. It's really important to have a good network, and it's not always what you know, it's also who you know. And that's an important part of it. So, attending events when you can, attending conferences, learning, learning what you can in those opportunities is really important. As you mentioned, mentorship was a huge thing for me throughout my master's. That's, really how I got through my master's, was with my mentors. And like I mentioned, I did my master's in public policy without ever intending on going into the government, but the research project and my mentors were really what made my master's program for me. And, since having those mentors throughout my master's degree, I've continued those relationships with them after I graduated. And, that's where my career is still happening from having those relationships with my mentors. Another thing, I was thinking, don't be afraid to try new things, take on new work, take that initiative. It's really important to help build your career. And then, like I said, having those people in your circle that are always looking out for you and looking for opportunities for you to help grow as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. So something in the form of a sponsor, even. So there's a mentor, and then there's kind of this concept of a sponsor, which might be helpful. Victor, anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I like the idea of all of these kind of approaches. I think one takeaway I'd offer everyone is to think of things like training and stretch assignments, volunteering, all of this stuff. They're just vehicles. They're all good vehicles, but there's a purpose behind them, and they're the means. The end is really learning, back to the idea of being useful, to not just show that you're awesome, but show that you add value to the people around you and the organization, and the lives of your colleagues and managers and so on. So that means not just volunteering to lead your team's charity campaign, if that's the kind of thing you're interested in, but delivering on your commitment. Remembering that this stuff is not just an opportunity for you to show off that you're smart and capable, but understanding who your audience is. And that ultimately, and I know this sounds a little cynical, it's like the rest of the workforce doesn't necessarily need to know or want to know that you're smart and capable. People around you need to know that you're trustworthy and that you deliver and that you're accountable and all the other things that we've described here, because that's how you fit into the puzzle that is the public service. You're not kind of an icon unto yourself. And so being able to use those opportunities to help demonstrate that is really impactful. And then really keeping that in mind, that like the purpose of a meeting isn't to show off your research paper the way it might have been in school. It's why should the people you're talking to care? And they care because what you've done makes their lives better.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great. So really trying to demonstrate the impact of all those efforts, right? That's excellent. Cassandra, anything to add to that?
I think I really, I echo the comments of Victor and Amzie. I think, and of course, keeping in mind your own preferences, personality, likes and dislikes, stressors, as much as you're able to look for those opportunities where you can do something maybe a little bit intense, like look for the teams that are busy, look for, and I think an important part of that is about the relationships you establish and working with managers who you trust to, not let you get in over your head, but to just push you outside of your comfort zone. I think one of the things that I've found, it sounds maybe a little bit silly, but I think that individuals can truly genuinely change and grow. And I think we all have these traits that we tend to think are just a part of who we are, and maybe they are unchangeable, at least at the beginning of our careers. For instance, I hated any kind of public speaking. I would not even want to speak in a meeting. Like, it was not my thing. And I'm in meetings sort of back to back all day now. And of course, sometimes I'm shocked when I look back on how much I actually was able to change. And it's just because I was in a situation where I had to do that all the time, and I had to become good at it. And you can take all the training that you want, and there's definitely an important role for training, and we should do that. But sometimes just forcing yourself, within a comfortable space to do the things that that you're weakest at, and being really self-aware about what those are, and then having that good sounding board in terms of getting feedback on how you're doing, and support and doing that is important too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Feedback is important. Just one question came through. We don't really have time, but we'll see if we can smash out an answer. So how does a new manager demonstrate quality work while building meaningful relationships, but also ensuring that expectations and pressures from senior managers are in line with available capacity from within the team? Who wants to take that one really quickly? Someone who's been through the COVID in health or life sciences, I'm sure. Victor, did you want to try that one?
I'll do the first few seconds while others consider their responses. I don't know that there's a great answer to that. Like you've described the conundrum of all managers everywhere in a few sentences, which is that ultimately there's pressure from all directions. You learn the resilience to deal with it. You don't necessarily learn to make it go away. The journey here is more about learning the tools and the strategies, learning how to maintain relationships, how to communicate with it. Like really everything we've talked about here, that's the tool set, right? How do you get to the point where you can have that conversation with your boss to say, you know what, the team can't do this and we're going to lose people, and they're frustrated and morale is low and we need to change course. And at the same time, how do you have the resilience to know that sometimes that's going to work and sometimes it's not, and you're going to be told to do it anyways? So all of the things that you've heard us talk about here, I think that's the tool set you need to develop. How you apply that is kind of situational. Even the part about understanding when to kind of pick your opportunities and when to be resilient and kind of accept that the thing isn't working for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely that's, I think what you're touching on there, Victor, is speaking truth to power, right? Which is very challenging, particularly, I think, in the public sector. I do want to wrap it up, though, and hand it over to David. So thank you so much to Cassandra, Victor, and Amzi. That was a really, really interesting conversation. I definitely learned things from that, and I really think the attendees did as well. So thank you so much for your time and great chat. Hand it over to you, David.
Well, thanks very much, Kelly. And thanks to our panel. You're the most diplomatic group I've heard speak in a while. You actually didn't reference bad bosses directly. You danced around that quite nicely. But I think we all would agree that you never forget a bad boss, and you usually learn a lot from that person that has an influence on your own leadership style. Cassandra, I really liked what you had to say around empathy and the importance of playing to strengths. I must admit, it took me a while in my career to really focus on the strengths. And Victor, loved your comments around building bridges and trust, in particular around the whole credibility. So important. And Amzi, your comment about knowing people's personal lives, so important to pay attention, to have an understanding. And I loved your comments also about the importance of networking and mentoring and thinking about, what is best. So you guys were amazing. Thank you so much. And I must say that IPAC does have a new mentoring program. And so we're just launching it now. We're going to have an announcement about it. What we're doing is we are matching people with individuals across Canada. So Victor, you work in the Ontario government. If you were part of the program, you would be matched with someone, say, from Vancouver who works in the city government. And Cassandra, you would be matched with someone in Nova Scotia who works for the provincial, and Amzi, we would match you with, well, we found something special. No, we could match you with someone from a territorial, or, the whole idea is to give you a different experience and also in an environment where you feel a little more comfortable because it's not your own organization. So you hear a little bit more about that coming. I want to mention a couple of things coming up. On December the 7th, we have an event on procurement. It's a partnership with Deloitte. We have speakers from the federal government who are going to share what they're doing in the area of procurement. Actually, it's quite interesting. So it's not always about best price. It's about, what is going to help the economy, what is going to help the environment. So very interesting coming up. And please mark your calendars. March the 2nd is our annual leadership summit. But now we're going to get to the fun part, and that's the networking. And I'm going to ask Erin to explain how we're going to do this. Erin?
Thanks, David. How are you? It's on the WonderMe platform, so I will put that into the chat for everyone. You can hop on there. You basically just walk around until you connect with someone, and then you can start a conversation. So we have rooms set up based on fun things like pets or work, like policy. So feel free to use that as an icebreaker, and David and I will hop on after this, and we can help anyone who needs it as well.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everyone.